Next up, we have Janet Benson, and Janet is going to talk about digital transformation of learning. Janet is our learning lead at the Learnovate Center, and Janet helps our Learnovate members apply best practices of learning theory and learning design. So I will, without further ado, turn it over to Janet. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I didn't want to do the whole, can you hear me okay? Can you see me okay? But I'm going to do it anyway. I read recently that Zoom calls these days are the equivalent of a seance. Are you out there? Can you hear me? So, but I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. So thank you for that introduction, Tom. It's really nice to be here today, chatting to everyone and listening to all the really good conversations that have happened so far. I feel like the rest of the conference is going to be absolutely brilliant. So I'm looking forward to that myself. So as Tom said, I'm a learning lead at the Learnovate Centre. I'm also a member of our innovation team. So we do a lot of work around innovation. We do a lot of workshopping. So I'm going to call on some elements of that as part of the presentation today. And from my perspective, I suppose I'm looking at digital transformation from a learning perspective, my background being very much in the world of learning and development, but also my studies being doing a master's in digital education at the University of Edinburgh, which I did fully online. So again, I got that really online immersive experience. And I'm interested to hear from Gilly Salmon actually tomorrow, because we read her book as part of that course. So that's quite exciting for me. So a brief agenda, and I don't want to bore anyone too much with death by PowerPoint, but I just want to give you an idea of some of the things I'd like to talk about today, like what is digital transformation in general, and then how does it apply to learning, some very high level best practices and guidelines for digital learning. So I'm kind of focusing here on, I guess, companies who have been forced to move into the online environment, but also hopefully some sort of best practices and guidelines for schools, and maybe for parents who are dealing with having their children at home. So I liked that whole concept of teaching at work, which I thought was a really nice one. Briefly talk about synchronous and asynchronous learning, because I think sometimes we assume that people understand what those are. Even in the world of L&D, even in the world of teaching, it's not always as explicit as we sometimes think when we work in the learning theory world and the world of digital education. Collaborative learning being something that's very important to be able to be fostered online and to build those connections. I suppose in relation to what some of the panel members were saying earlier, it's about fostering that culture of engagement with each other, the social element of being online. So how do you do that through collaborative learning? And then I'm going to just talk about some tools that we're all quite aware of, but what you can use, the different tools that we're currently using today for your online learning experiences. So very high level, I just wanted to mention that at the start of the current situation, I'm going to try not to use the C word or the P word, but situation. We created a high level infographic that we wanted to use to be able to help organizations that were struggling to move online, for institutions that were kind of looking at how do we do some best practices around moving into the online environment. And this infographic is available to anyone who would like it and find it useful as sort of nearly just a high level tips and tricks type guide. My email address will be at the end of this as well, so you can get in contact with me, no problem. So just, I suppose, to introduce from my perspective what digital transformation is, and to start off with some statistics. And I think some of this relates to kind of what Mary was saying earlier about a lot of people wanting to work from home. Some of the studies that have been done in the recent weeks and months have found that like 83% of Irish workers want to continue working from home when this crisis is over. So that's a study you can see conducted by the Whitaker Institute at NUIG. And I think that's an important point, is that while we're in a current situation and we're addressing having to be online and having to move learning online, it's something that's not likely to go away anytime soon. So I think we have to be in a position where we can strategically look at, well, what are we currently doing and how do we continue to support people who are working from home? And also, how do we support them with their online learning? Like the benefits we know, and I can speak to this myself, I work from home quite a lot. I'm based here in the west of Ireland, and our office is based, as everybody knows, in Trinity College in Dublin. So, the autonomy of being able to work from home, having that, work-life balance where you can go out for a walk in the middle of the day, for your lunch break or whatever, it offers an awful lot to people who are working from home. And we know, as some of the panel members mentioned earlier, there are a lot of struggles for people at the moment from a mental health perspective, not being able to switch off from work, but there are also ways to sort of ensure that there are things that you do to make sure that you kind of, keep really good practices and, been able to kind of have that work-life balance. So again, there are some of the challenges. People who find it hard to switch off, have issues communicating and collaborating, and that's something that I want to talk about a little bit more in relation to learning later on. But it's good to have those statistics. So So digital transformation is often sort of touted as the fourth industrial revolution. There's no prizes for this, but if people would like to kind of have a guess in the chat what the other three are, I can give you that information later on. And I think the important thing really here is to look at, digital transformation is the strategic adoption of digital technology. So it's not about, taking a tool for that, or we have the LMS, but everything else we're going to do face to face. You have to look at it from a company perspective if you're going to move everything online and fully digitally transform, because it offers an awful lot. So we know that it offers some processes and productivity improvements. Even just from people working at home, their productivity tends to increase, which is really interesting. From a learning perspective, online learning offers really good learning experiences. It's the ability to scale solutions. Again, we were talking about that a few moments ago. It's offering that sort of approach whereby we can reach anyone, anywhere. We can hire people from that aren't based on location but based on talent alone, which is something that's really exciting. So in relation to digital transformation, it offers us an awful lot. So then to move to, I suppose, digital transformation of learning specifically and what the opportunities are. So we know that online learning offers that level of flexibility. And I'm thinking about people who are at home with children, or even without children, who are working, who are maybe taking a course, they need to do their work learning as well. It offers that level of flexibility where people can engage with the learning experience as and when they have time, or when their energy levels are at their best. And again, it offers that level of scalability, so you can reach people at home. You can, deal with people in lots of different countries. It offers that massive scalability that just the face-to-face learning environment just doesn't offer. And it offers learning management too. So like it's moving away from that more paper-based, sign off a training form, for example. And I mean, that's a long time ago now, for some companies, but for many companies, they're still in that position, and there's still that, we're going to go off and have a training day and we're going to book a hotel room, etc. We can manage our learning experiences online, and there's some amazing tools out there that can do that. Learner autonomy is very important. And when I think about adult learners in particular, and I think someone earlier mentioned, self-determination theory, and relation to motivation, learner autonomy is very important. So, ensuring learners have a level of control over their own learning is very motivational and very engaging. So if we can get that level of autonomy online, it really helps people to engage with the learning experience. And we've all experienced the death by PowerPoint passive learning experience where, it's a one-way sort of delivery of information and lots of, statistics and documentation, etc. Active learning is something that's really well promoted and encouraged and facilitated through the online environment. And it ensures that, the learner is engaging not only with the learning content, but also with each other, with the tutor, and it makes them that more active learner, which actually makes for a more deeper and much deeper learning experience. And again, personalized learning, it's easier to reach people at a personal level online. You can imagine being in a training room with 30, 40, 100 people. It's very hard to personalize the experience, where online technologies and tools, even through the standard LMS or the learning management systems, allow that level of personalized learning and allow learners to choose their learning path, which is, again, something that's very motivational for adult learners in particular. And then again, we're looking at students here as well at school, and given that the sort of online learning, that level of autonomy, it's encouraging students to be more independent and collaborative. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later when I look at collaborative learning. We're promoting those students to kind of take control of their own learning experience, and to be those more independent learners, which is exactly what we want from these kinds of learning experiences. And I started on the positive, but again, there are always challenges in relation to anything got to do with the digital, and particularly in relation to the digital transformation of learning. And we always have that reluctance to change, no matter what sort of new processes you bring in place, for example, into a workplace. There's always some level of reluctance to change, and based on the personalities of employees, and based on their familiarity with tech, how confident they are, for example. So that's something that as L&D professionals or as teachers, we need to look at. How do we minimize the effects of this change on our learners to make sure that we're setting them up for success and confidence? And we're all aware of technical challenges. So even I think today, maybe there have been the odd small technical challenge in relation to, hosting this session online. We know there's always going to be people who just, struggle with technology, who, sometimes find it hard to log in, can't see exactly what to do. So again, it's about providing as much information up front to your learners. So you're setting them up for success. That's something I really believe in. It's about making sure they have everything that they need to feel confident and motivated and challenged, and at the same time that, that they're going to be successful. And Engagement in particular, we know is a challenge. You know, there are a lot of statistics around people who feel isolated. Say, for example, just engaging with an online course. A lot of people drop out just due to that isolated element. They're not really engaging properly with each other. And we know from speaking to a lot of schools recently in relation to the current situation, you know, student engagement has been a big issue. And that's also, you know, sort of linked to the whole change element. You know, this is all new for so many schools, so many students, so many teachers. This is a whole new situation. And levels of engagement can go down because there can be confusion about what's happening. You know, they're not exactly sure what they're meant to be doing and when and all that kind of stuff. So I'll briefly touch on that as well later. And then motivation. So what's the motivation to engage with online learning when you're at home, when you're, you know, necessarily trying to get your work done? For example, if you're working from home, what's the motivation to engage with upskilling or doing some additional training when you already feel like you've got a lot of screen time? And then that lack of interaction and collaboration with others. We are missing each other when we're working from home. And it's something that actually we do really well at Learnovate. We do a lot of social online you know, events and activities, and we make sure that we really do collaborate and interact with each other on a social level, which is really important and can't be underestimated in the current situation where people can be quite lonely at home. And then assessment and homework. This is something, again, that, you know, it can be a challenge, but can be really easily facilitated through an online learning environment. And homework is one that I know, after speaking to teachers, that they can struggle with. How do I do the homework elements online? So again, I have a couple of slides on that later. So just in relation, I guess, to these are very high level best practices and guidelines for digital learning. I hope that, you know, some of the information I'm giving you here is can be quite high level, but I hopefully are the kind of tips and tricks and guidelines that people will find easily implementable or can take away and go, yeah, you know what, I might be able to do a bit of that or a bit of this from, you know, at home or in the workplace. And hopefully it'll set up a foundation then for some of the really great talks that are to come later on today and the rest of the week. So it might seem like a fairly straightforward one, but in speaking to, you know, lots of different industry, lots of different teachers, you know, people in different areas of life, there is that element where, you know, some people have a lot of knowledge because they're doing a lot of research, for example, and, you know, they're talking to a lot of people and finding out a lot of information. So I think it's very important to share that knowledge. So anything that you found useful that you can share with your colleagues and friends is really important. So even think about, and I know from my experience of doing, you know, an online learning master's, you know, I remember some of the really good stuff that I got to, you know, engage with and interact with, and what I found really good. And these are things that I can draw upon when I look at, well, how do I facilitate online learning? You know, what are the things that really worked, and what are the things that I would definitely not include because it was a poor experience for me? So it's really important to kind of share that information, and it's kind of helping everybody else to get to the same level. And again, we know that social media, YouTube have really useful resources if you're looking to find out some best practices. I've been speaking to a teacher friend of mine recently who's also, you know, very much in the research space, and she uses a lot of, you know, Facebook groups where they have experts on online learning that teachers can actually ask questions of, or, you know, bounce ideas off. Because again, you know, when I think about teachers as well, schools to different levels have moved to the online environment, whether they've become a device school already and have already set their students up for this whole situation, or they've really been thrown into it and really are struggling and really unsure about what they should be doing and even what tools they should be using. So again, it's good to kind of get a feel for what's out there, what's working for other schools, what's working for other companies, you know, what can I learn from the best practices or the people that really understand. And that's something, again, at Learnovate that we can provide. You know, if people need advice or they need some kind of guidance on these sorts of things, that they can come to us and ask questions, obviously. And then surveying learners. So, you know, what device do people have at home? Again, you know, we found out from teachers that many, you know, students might not have access to many devices, or they're sharing devices at home, which makes it difficult to get access. And also Wi-Fi being a problem. Again, you know, I'm here in the west of Ireland, might not necessarily have the best Wi-Fi access, although actually I'm kind of lucky that I do. But again, we can't assume that people are in a position where they have a lot of Wi-Fi or even have Wi-Fi access at all. So again, find out from your learners, whether that be your employees, your students, find out what access they have, what Wi-Fi access, and then you can start to make decisions on what kind of learning you're going to provide to ensure that everyone's getting the same experience, no matter what device they have access to or what kind of Wi-Fi connections they might have. And then you look to develop your experience. So you know, L&D professionals, teachers, they understand learning, they understand pedagogy. Teachers know how to teach. And I think that sometimes they lose confidence when they're faced with technical or online challenges. But I think it's really important to remind teachers and L&D professionals, anyone developing learning, that start with the problem. And again, that's something at Learnovate that we're very much advocates of. We don't think about solution first and, you know, what's the really cool tool that's out there that you might be able to shoehorn into the learning. It's about the problem first. And it's always about, you know, how do I want to teach something? How do I want to provide a learning experience? And then what are the tools and technologies and approaches that will facilitate that for me? So again, always start with the problem, always start with the pedagogy. You know how to teach. Think about that first, and then how you facilitate that with whatever tool you might have at your disposal. And then focusing on the learner. So, you know, what do they need and when do they need it? Make sure they have what they need, that they understand when they need to do things is very important. You know, we can't always give a fully personalized experience to our learners, but where possible, make sure we have an understanding of them and what they might need at particular times. And, you know, what might be the barriers that they are facing in relation to engaging with their online learning. And the more information we have about our learners, the better we can tailor our learning experiences and our learning solutions to what they need specifically. And this is my absolute pet peeve. I think, you know, and again, we can't, you know, punish anyone or you know, any companies for, you know, doing this, but taking all your PowerPoints, all your documentation and putting them online and saying, that's it, job done. You know, the learning's done, we're online, it's great, is definitely not online learning. It's just, again, delivering content that's not engaging, that's very difficult for people to engage with. So please don't be tempted to just take what you have already and put it online. Online learning, digital education is a completely different ball game when it comes to learning in general. So you really need to think about what are the different elements that you need to have part of that learning experience. Otherwise, it just will not be effective. And that's definitely not what you want. And we know, you know, in a classroom, in a sort of face-to-face environment where you're in a lecture theatre, it's easier kind of to engage, you know, to engage with a person, to be able to talk to each other, to, you know, make sure you have all that information. But when you're online, and we know about this, we know about, you know, Zoom fatigue, it can be very difficult to engage with online learning if it's in big, massive videos or big, massive pieces of content. And I'm actually doing an online course myself at the moment. And I'm starting to see little bits and pieces like that to say, oh, you know, that bit of content could have been smaller. I think I would have engaged with it more. I felt like an overload of information. I had to go back to it. So think about breaking up your content. It's, again, you know, people talk about micro learning, but I think it's more about, you know, it's very common sense that when you're online, that it's hard to engage because it's you and the computer. So making sure, you know, that people have content in digestible chunks that don't overload them with, you know, they don't have this cognitive overload is really, really important. And then mixing up your delivery, because I think sometimes we can rely on what we feel we're confident with. And, you know, we kind of go, well, do you know what, I'm just going to record myself and send out the video. But a bit of variety really does help with engagement. If you're engaging with an online course in lots of different ways, whether that be Q&A or interactions or whatever that might be, you know, think about how you can deliver your content in different ways, just to ensure that people kind of go, oh yeah, well, that's a little bit different, you know. And then for your learners, I can't specify enough about setting expectations. We want to set them up for success. So making sure that we provide learning on any tools that they have to use and not assuming. And again, this is something I think when we think about students, we think about how au fait they are with technology. They've always had technology in their lives, not someone like me who's old, who didn't grow up with technology. But, but now I'm absolutely, I love using technology. But we can't assume that because students can use things like, say, Snapchat or Facebook or whatever, actually Facebook probably not. My nieces would be embarrassed to say that I mentioned Facebook at all, but Snapchat, that they can use things like PowerPoint, because we know that that's not actually the case. So we have to provide learning on any tools that we expect them to use and not assume that they already know. And it goes for adults too. We can't assume that somebody is necessarily understanding how to use Zoom, or we're going to use Zoom in breakout rooms. You know, any of that kind of stuff, we have to make sure that people know how to use the tools first. So at least that then there's not a barrier to their learning and we're not making them work for their learning. And again, it's about personalizing communication, and we can't always do that, but I think it's important to use people's names where possible. If there's any communications you're doing synchronously online with people, you know, try to, you know, talk to them, you know, as if you were in the training room. It just helps with that kind of engagement element and, you know, personalizing the experience for them, even if it's not a fully personalized experience. And again, it's about interaction and activities. We don't want to sit and I you know, you're sitting listening to me now and there's not a whole lot of interaction activities, but, you know, this is for 25 minutes. If you went through you know, a whole day course. If you were doing a fully online course and there were no interaction and activities, you wouldn't be long switching off. So it's about making sure that people have things to do. And again, that's promoting that learning by doing and that active learning. And you know, reflection is something that is a very important element of the deep learning experience, allowing learners to reflect on their experience, to think about what they've learned, you know, even have some kind of formalized reflection whereby you can ask them some questions about, you know, what they got out of the learning, how are they going to apply it, for example, in the workplace. All those kind of good things that make people think about the learning experience are really useful for sort of ensuring that the information is solidified in their long-term memory and they've had that really deeper learning experience. So I'm aware of speaking too quickly because I know some of the earlier speakers spoke quite fast, and I think somebody again who's Irish, we tend to talk very quickly, so I hope I'm not speaking too quickly. But I'm going to talk briefly about synchronous and asynchronous learning, because again, I think we can't assume that people understand what these terms mean, or you know, how they actually facilitate these types of situations. So synchronous is when the tutor, the teacher, and the learner, this class, are all online at the same time. So that's all that synchronous means. And this is something that I think, you know, I think when I'm thinking about this in relation to teachers in you know, specifically, I think, you know, think about what's behind you, because I think sometimes you forget that there could be personal, you know, things behind you that you wouldn't want your students necessarily to see. So think about, you know, even your lighting. My lighting today is a little bit dark because for the first day in I don't know how long, there's actually a bit of sunshine in the west of Ireland, but that's Murphy's Law. So because I'm sitting in front of a window. So think about, you know, the fact that, you know, you've got good lighting, that people should be able to see you quite clearly. And then just, yeah, think about what's behind you, really. And the likes of whiteboards, such as a Zoom whiteboard, actually is really useful during a synchronous session. I was surprised to see how many people weren't aware that there actually is a Zoom whiteboard function. And all it is if you go into the share button, there's an option to obviously, you know, pick what you want to share, but there's a whiteboard in there. So you can go in, share the whiteboard with your synchronous class or your, you know, your learning session, and get people to add content. So add text, add drawings if they want to, just even, you know, just to kind of be collaborative and kind of come up with a task together online and use that whiteboard. And that screen, and there's so many good screen capture softwares out there, but they give you the opportunity to pre-record a video of yourself. Again, I think there's an element there about flipping the classroom where you know, you can record a lot of your content and provide it to your learners in advance, whereby you're then using the synchronous online time in a more effective way, in that, you know, you can use it for interacting with each other, having discussions, doing some Q&A, doing some problem solving, discussing the content, which is a more effective use of your online time rather than you being online and delivering a piece of learning, which can be quite exhausting as well. And it gives you a chance to sort of get off the screen for a while and work on other things. And these are just a couple of the tools that teachers in particular recommended as being quite useful and easy to achieve. So Screencastify and Screencast-O-Matic. It's also part of Windows 10, actually, some of that screen capturing software, and lots of other softwares too. But so these are some of the nice ones that you can use if you want to kind of record some of your sessions. And it's important then, obviously, and again, you know, some of these things are quite common sense, but share any content you've created so that people have access to it afterwards. In particular, when I think about, you know, at school, even if it's not a, you know, like based on the current situation, if students are out of school for whatever reason, it's good that they have the access to the content when they need it, so they can go back and view anything that they've missed. So that's the really nice part of online learning, is that you can record a lot and have it sort of to hand if you ever need it again. And then asynchronous is when the class isn't online altogether at the same time. So again, you know, we use a lot of shared documents for this. So you can use things like Google Docs, you know, Google Slides, all the presentation type tools, Microsoft 365 as well. Any of these kind of documents where people can work on them, you know, they can work on them synchronously at the same time. They can also work on them asynchronously. So add pieces of content, you know, read what other people are writing and adding to it. And then whiteboards as well. So as I mentioned, the Zoom one, but one that we use a lot, and definitely as part of the innovation services team at Learnovate, we use Miro, which is a really nice tool for whiteboarding and for workshopping. And they can be used both synchronously and asynchronously, which we find great at Learnovate, because when we do a workshop, there's a huge amount of information that we might gather from clients and groups of people. But we will always have access to that because we'll always have that Miro board, which is really useful. And even, you know, to kind of go back and remind ourselves or to add something that we didn't think of, it's really, really useful for that. So I actually think it's even a better way than a face-to-face, because, you know, if we were in in the office, we'd probably be using just the standard whiteboards or whatever, but Miro allows us to keep all this information and to be able to refer to it and see our train of thought when we work on larger projects, which has been really, really useful over the last couple of months. And again, we're talking about Zoom fatigue or just fatigue from being on screen. Providing asynchronous work gives you, as the tutor, the teacher, some of that valuable off-screen time. So again, think about when you want to be online, or when suits you to be online. What, is it in the morning when your energy levels are that little bit higher, and then you assign some asynchronous offline work for later when your energy levels may dip a bit? Because we are all feeling that, sort of that fatigue with being online a lot of online meetings, for example. And this sort of allows you, okay, the mix of synchronous and asynchronous allows you that opportunity to sort of do some offline work and to get away from the screen for a while, which I think at this stage we all feel we could do with some of that. So, we deal a lot with schools and with teachers, and online homework is something that a few schools have come to us to say, we're finding a bit of difficulty with this. We're not exactly sure how to facilitate it. And, the fact that students have all their books and all that kind of stuff. So, what I will say about online homework, though, is that it offers students that much wider range of formats. So it gets them to do lots of different things in different ways. And I think that's what's quite exciting about it, whether you're using Google Classroom or whatever tool you're using. MS Teams, I know a lot of schools use. It's, it gives you a chance to mix things up a little bit and provide a bit of variety, which for your students obviously is very motivating. But for you as a teacher too, it can make it a little bit more interesting that you're not getting a lot of sort of written work. And again, not to refer to the situation too much at the moment, but it can limit the amount of books and copies being brought home and back to school, which we kind of want to limit. I know a lot of schools are, not allowing students to bring books and copies in and out at all. So they really have to embrace the online homework world. But I think if we can limit that at all, and again, we're thinking of the well-being of children, bringing lots and lots of books into school is not something that we can continue to do in the longer term. And I really like this one, that if you offer your students some choice, they will be creative. So let them kind of, be creative, create video content, create audio content. Let's see what they can do with their homework. Provide them some level of choice and variety, as well as all that text-based work that's fairly standard, just so that they get their creative juices flowing. It gives them something interesting to do. It gives them that level of variety and creativity that we don't always kind of associate with homework as such. It's often seen as a punishment, but I think it can be seen as a really nice opportunity as well. So from the teachers, again, we've spoken to, you have to ensure any tasks you set your students are really clearly explained, because you will be inundated with questions online. And we know that teachers spend a lot of their time answering questions and often answering the same questions over and over. But in the online environment, you don't want to get pinged in the evening about, oh, I don't really understand this, teacher, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to make sure you've explained every single step. Otherwise, you really will be inundated with these questions, and it can be just absolutely never ending for anyone there as a teacher. And Google Classroom and Microsoft Teams are very useful tools for online homework. The teachers we've spoken to say that the corrections and feedback are really quick and easy to do. So it's worth investing or having a trial of some of these tools if you don't really already do it in the classroom, to see, well, which of these will work for us, and which will take some of the hard grunt work out of correcting homework. So an online environment it's just so useful to correct that written work. So if students, and we know that a lot of teachers are getting students to provide photos of their work, you can then correct it online through the comments and feedback functions of lots of different types of tools. So briefly, just to touch on collaborative learning, because I just feel collaboration is something that when we look to move to an online learning environment, it's one of the things that tends to get left behind a little bit. And we're kind of going, oh, let's just give them the content and then we'll give them an assessment. That's it done. It'll be grand. But we know that collaborative learning is really important, especially for adults, to engage with each other. And I think, it's about creating that community of learners working together towards a common outcome. So it's about active learning. Again, it's about people engaging with each other and being actively involved with the content as well and with the learning experience. So we want to make sure that people have opportunities to collaborate with each other, even when they're online. And the best kind of tasks for that kind of collaborative learning are tasks that promote kind of problem solving and critical thinking skills, which are, and there's lots of different types of tasks. And again, it's about mixing it up and providing some variety to your learners. So the type of tasks that really work well for collaborative learning are things like group challenges. So you're getting everyone to work together to come up with, the response to a particular challenge. Brainstorming. And again, we talked earlier about the use of whiteboards and some of those like mural tools to brainstorm ideas. I think that those kinds of tasks are really useful for getting people thinking about things and maybe coming up with a solution to a problem. Collaborative writing, again, using those online tools such as Google Docs and MS Teams to kind of put together a presentation or a piece of writing that they work on together is really nice task to be able to do as a collaboration. And any kind of problem solving. So we look at a lot of kind of problem solving activities that can promote collaboration between people. You know, somebody will kind of come up with an idea, people will, you know, draw on their experiences in relation to it. And again, it's getting them to interact with the activity as much as with each other. So people are interacting with each other and they feel that they're part of the experience. They feel like they're part of the workplace, they're part of the class, even if they're not physically present, which I think is extremely important at the moment. And these are just some kind of like nice tips that we've kind of gone through in the past in relation to facilitating online collaboration. So consider separating learners into smaller groups to work together, and then present back to the wider group. A lot of people find collaboration difficult because if it's a wide group of people, sometimes their level of confidence isn't great, or you know, they may not want to present, or they might not have the level of confidence that other people in the group might have. So it's nice to kind of separate learners into smaller groups and then come back. And there are some nice tools that you're probably aware of that we can use to facilitate that. And I think it's important to also think about, you know, rotating those groups. So for diversity, you know, you don't necessarily, and I'm thinking about in a workplace, you might not necessarily always want to be in the same group with all the same people. So it's nice to kind of rotate those groups for diversity, but just for interest, for people to chat to each other in different ways and maybe talk to people that they wouldn't normally interact with, which is really nice. And I think this is a very important one, and this is an important one for adults and, you know, younger learners. If you don't assign roles in these sort of collaborative tasks, you can have the situation where you have either someone who completely takes over the entire situation and runs the entire collaborative session and doesn't allow anyone else to get involved, or you have the opposite, where you have people who kind of are lurkers and they're kind of, I'm not really sure what I'm meant to be doing, so I'll probably kind of do nothing and let the rest of them do it. If you actually assign roles to people, it ensures they all have to get engaged. And those roles can vary from timekeeper to, you know, the person who's going to present back to the wider group to, you know, the person who's going to lead the situation, for example. And again, mix that up as much as possible. There might be natural leaders in a group, but it's good to give everyone an opportunity to kind of take on different roles, even from just, you know, for the bit of variety that they're going to get out of it. And this is really good too. I mean, for these kind of sessions, you're starting as a facilitator. So again, you're setting the learners up for their success. You're setting expectations. You're making sure they understand the task. You're making sure the time that they have and what you expect to get at the end of the session. But as you start as a facilitator, you're kind of moving to being more of a moderator. So you're sort of going into, say, if we're talking about breakout rooms, which you will in a second, you're looking at being more of a moderator, checking that everyone's okay, that things are going well, and making sure that, you know, you can answer their questions. But then you do actually become more of an observer, where people start to take control of the situation themselves. And that actually goes for, you know, the younger students as well. We want them to be those kind of critical thinking learners who take control of their own experience. You're just observing the experience at the end, which means that, you know, that they have moved to become more independent learners and more autonomous learners, which is exactly what we want from these kinds of sessions. So again, I'm going to talk briefly about tools that, I mean, a lot of people are going to be aware of a lot of these tools, but you know, what they can be really useful for, and to ensure that you have a nice variety of tools if you can, just because we know that a lot of companies will say have a learning management system. So they will, you know, ensure all their learning is on the learning management system, everything is being tracked. But not all learning management systems offer things like discussion boards or any opportunities for collaboration or interaction with each other. So think about what's the functionality of the learning management system you have in your business, and can it facilitate some of those best practices that we've kind of just been discussing? You know, those interactions and those things that we really want to ensure that we promote as part of a good learning experience. And it's the same with the schools. You know, if you've got Google Classroom, you're using Schoology, any of those tools that you have, look to see what the functionality is like, and use that functionality where possible. But again, starting with, you know, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? What's the learning objective? What's the pedagogy? And then move to, okay, well, I can use this to facilitate this, but I'm also maybe going to use something like Zoom to kind of, you know, to engage face to face, you know, to have meetings, etc., with my students, whatever that might be. So some really good tools for communication discussions. We're using Zoom, MS Teams have breakout rooms. We know the likes of Google are looking to do those breakout room functions, and they're really useful. Again, as I was speaking about the collaboration and the breaking people into smaller groups, really useful for things like that. You know, bringing people together at the end after being in smaller, you know, breakout sessions is really useful for those collaborative activities. But also, and I'd like to highlight that, you know, we're looking at the social element of people being at home as well, right? So, you know, digital transformation involves that sort of social interaction, and we found that at Learnovate and at TRNI, we tend to have a monthly quiz, and we use MS Teams to kind of host those quizzes, and we go off into our teams and we do our quiz questions and come back. And I'd like to say there's no cheating whatsoever, because we're academics for the most part, but I won't comment on that any further. So discussion boards and forums, again, if your LMS can facilitate that, if they have discussion boards, post questions, get people to respond, any kind of forums like that, just keep people engaged. Even asynchronously, you can check in to see what kind of questions have been asked, and interact with each other. Even try to create a social kind of platform where people can discuss things. So at Learnovate, we have Slack, which is great. There's also, the alternative is Chanty. There's lots of different ones. But again, you can create lots of different channels. So whether they're quite formal, so based on a particular topic, or for a particular team, or for, a particular group to be able to interact with each other or work on a particular project. But, at Learnovate, we also have social channels, where we recommend reading to each other. We recommend TV shows that we're watching. We share photos of our pets. And that kind of stuff is really nice, because it helps you to feel that you're still, with your work colleagues, with your work buddies, you're still, engaged in their lives and been able to have those conversations. So I think, that can't be underestimated, as we said, even for just our mental health perspective. And a lot of people don't want to use WhatsApp and Viber, but they're out there if you wanted to create WhatsApp, groups to be able to interact, or even get people to ask questions. I know a lot of schools, a lot of, sports groups. My sister's children are in rugby clubs, and, they have WhatsApp groups just to keep people updated about different activities, for example. So again, it can work for learning as well, just a ping to say there's going to be a new learning experience, it's going to be a new challenge next week, or whatever that might be. And then social media groups, and that depends on whether the school, your organization, is a kind of a social media accepting type workplace or type school. But those groups can really help people to keep engaged and discuss things with each other, and keep up that level of communication. So I suppose it depends whether you want to make it very formal or informal. So again, when we're looking at collaboration, wikis are really useful. Everyone's, aware of Wikipedia, which is probably, the world's biggest wiki. But there are other ones that you can use, say, for example, in the classroom, there's like a class wiki. And again, they're like a board where you can go in and add information asynchronously or synchronously, and can be really handy for those kinds of collaborative tasks. Again, for, e-portfolios and online blogs are useful for, I think they're great for like reflection purposes. So keeping track of your learning experience. But they can also be quite collaborative, because most of these types of either e-portfolios or online blogs, so the likes of, I would have used WordPress or Weebly a lot in the past, allow your peers to actually comment on your posts if you want them to. So obviously you can make the post private, but they're really useful for if you want to get, say, peer-to-peer feedback, or you want people to collaborate or provide suggestions to each other, maybe on a particular activity or task. So useful for both collaboration and for, facilitating those sort of online reflections that are great for the deeper learning experience. And I've said these, plenty of times before. Document sharing, really useful for collaboration, and quite straightforward if you wanted to create a presentation, collaboratively. And I mentioned earlier, I just wanted to highlight this, we kind of, as part of the innovation services team, we trialed a lot of different types of tools when we realized we'd have to move our innovation workshops online. And we found, just for ourselves and for our own needs, that Miro was the one that we ended up going with. It's just the level of the tools that are within it, what we needed it for. So you can see, if you can see my screen there, the left-hand side allows you to add post-its, add shapes, upload documents, put in comments. It's got timers, it's got a chat function, it's got everything really that we needed. And also, it comes with a lot of sort of standard templates, but we were able to upload our Learnovate innovation templates onto it quite simply, which was great. So I think it's one of those really good tools that, have a trial of it even. I think they do a free trial, and if you wanted to have a look and see how this might benefit either your organization or your collaborative work with your students, for example, it's something that we're finding that is really, really useful. And people really enjoy engaging with it too, because it's quite user-friendly. And as I said, we at Learnovate work on a lot of larger core research projects that Nessa would have mentioned earlier. And we're finding that having the Miro boards is so useful just to keep track of our thought process. So we might work over 3 months, for example, on a project, and we might start in one place and end up in another place, but it's really good to see our train of thought and how we got from one place to another. And it's been brilliant for when we kind of look to, well, how did the problem, how did the solution we came up with match to the problem? And we have those Miro boards there to be able to refer to, which is really, really useful. So I hope I'm in time, because I can't see the time, but I just wanted to kind of finish off by just saying not to be afraid of trial and error. I think, as learning professionals, we know that learning by making mistakes in a safe way is a really good way to learn. but I think it's about bringing your learners on board with you and, letting them know that you're trying something different. This is new for everybody, potentially you're in it together. And it's about, if there are mistakes, if technology goes down, if something doesn't quite work, let's move on to something else, but we're all working through it together. So I think, something that I found recently from doing a webinar is that I learned something from one of the attendees that I didn't know about the technology that I was using myself. So it's great that you can learn from each other, but don't be afraid to make those mistakes. I think that's really important, because sometimes, it will be successful, but everything's a learning opportunity. And I think that's the key takeaway to take away from all of these types of experiences. So that's my email address. We have some really nice guides we created at Learnovate. If anyone would be interested in getting in touch and getting access to any of those. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, Tom.
Hi, Janet. Yeah, thanks for that. And
sorry, I just realized I ran over a little bit.
No, it's all right. I know we have a ton of questions coming in from the audience. We're not going to be able to get to them all because we do have another speaker coming in, but we'll ask a couple of them, and maybe afterwards, if you have time, jump into the chat.
Yeah, or if people want to email me anything, absolutely no problem at all.
But let's start with one of the audience questions. Came in from Moira Hunt asking about the engagement with your staff. Sometimes the staff, you've got all the tools and tricks and everything that you've been talking about, but you may not have that engagement. So she is asking, what is the best way to engage those staff online? I can't remember the exact wording.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think one of the main things that we struggle with is when we move to something new. So whether it's, a new initiative at work, for example, we know that employees can get quite jaded when you're bringing in new things. And I've been in organizations myself where something new has come in and you're kind of going, oh, this is another thing. And do I have to do this? But I think it's very important to ensure that learners and employees are aware of the what's in it for me element. So, why should I engage with this? Well, because it's going to work really well for you, because it's flexible, because you learn at your own pace. If you're at home, you can engage with this. And I think something that's quite interesting is that I think, there will always be people who will miss, the going off to a training day in a hotel. We're going to get the sandwiches, we're going to get the scones, we're going to have, and they miss that. So we have to sort of look at, well, how do we get them on board with this new way of doing things and ensuring that it's in their best interest to engage with it. So it's bringing them along with you. And I think the other thing is, I think sometimes some people won't. So I deal a lot with my sort of speciality would be around game-based learning, for example. And I was saying when I talk at conferences about game-based learning that there will always be some people who, no matter how great it is, no matter how engaging, how much fun it is, some people just won't engage with it, just based on their personalities or whatever else. So I think it's about providing people with alternative options. So even if you're creating this great learning experience and people go, oh, I can't be bothered. Okay, that's fine. Provide them with the PDFs. If that's what they need and that's the way they want to engage with it, that's absolutely fine. So I think if you can, where you can provide alternatives and some choice to learners, I think that's something that can be really useful to kind of get them on board and get them more motivated. I hope that kind of answered the question, Moira.
Thanks, Janet. Yeah, that does. And we are going to be out of time. We're going to move on to the next speaker, and this give you that chance to offer the audience that choice and maybe do some asynchronous responses.
I'm going to log into the session and answer some questions in the chat. Thanks, Tom.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Janet. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.